MNN Podcast. I, of course, am Tommy Bolden, and joining me, as always, is Taylor Salen. How you doing tonight, Taylor?
Doing great, man. How about yourself?
Doing okay, I guess. Well, we all know this week is going to be Star Trek's return to theaters with Star Trek Into the Darkness. So we thought tonight's discussion would be on the original films that came before this, even including the J.J. Abrams film that was just out a few years ago. And we've got the list ready. Now, Taylor hasn't seen all the movies. I've seen all the movies, but it's been so long since I've seen most of them that I'm basically just going to go off what I can remember. But, we're just going to talk about them a little bit and just get ourselves pumped up for the new Star Trek that's coming out this week. So, hope you guys enjoy. And with that happening, I'm going to go ahead and let Taylor take it away with the first film.
Cool. Well, even before we jump in, I just want to get. Why don't you just go ahead and give the listeners kind of a history of your relationship with Star Trek? How did you first hear about Star Trek that you watched? What kind of drew you into the Star Trek world, if you will?
Well, what the Star Trek was, I was a little kid. I was about 5 or 6 years old, and I remember going over to my grandparents' house, and they had, in some relation, but no relation whatsoever, they had Star Wars, and I would always watch the Star Wars films when I come over, because at my house, I didn't have a VCR. At my house, I didn't have a VCR. I really didn't have a lot of channels on television or anything like that. So, when I went to my grandparents, I'd watch all the movies they had and everything like that. So, one day I had gone back home after the weekend with my grandparents. I'd gone back home to my mom, and my mom was watching this brightly multicolor, funky looking show. And I remember sitting down next to her, and I was like, "Mom, what is this?" And she says, "Oh, this is Star Trek." And I was like, "Star Trek?" I was like, "Oh, what is this, a ripoff of Star Wars?" And she was like, no. She was like, this come before Star Wars. This is, it's a really good show. It's been on for a very long time and everything like that. So the first thing I saw was and it just so happened to be, it was the episode, that Kahn was on. And I just remember sitting down and watching that. And, yeah, Space Seed. I remember sitting down and watching that, and I was like, "Oh man, this was really cool." And then pretty soon, I started to see The Next Generation, and then after Next Generation went off the air, we got stuck with that abysmal Deep Space Nine, and I kind of lost it after that. I didn't care about Deep Space Nine. And
so you're saying? I was gonna say Voyager, man. That was a fun one.
Oh. I tried to watch a few episodes of Voyager, and I was like, you know what, this is absolute garbage, and I'm done.
Yeah.
But it just all goes back to me being a kid, and that's just a fond memory I have, was sitting at my house and watching the original, and then watching Next Generation. And by the way, and I know I'm going to offend some people out there, but TGN is my favorite. It has to be. The original Star Trek is good by itself. It's a good show. It's a great show. But it's more comedic than anything. The acting is really silly, and you could tell they weren't really taking themselves seriously until they really hit that cult following, and then when that happened, then they started taking the show kind of seriously. So go ahead.
Well, yeah, and the funny thing that people don't often remember about the original series is that it was only on for 3 years. I mean, the thing that
is correct.
Yeah, I mean, it was really this kind of small time thing that became big after it was canceled. But at the same time, I grew up, just like you, as a Star Wars kid. I mean, I remember being introduced to A New Hope, or just Star Wars as it should be referred to, in my opinion, back when I was maybe 5 or 6 years old, and I just remember being enamored with it. But I never actually saw any of the original movies, or any of the kind of the Next Generation episodes. The thing that I remember was turning on like watching wrestling when I was a child, watching WWE, and afterwards they would always have a Next Generation episode on. And I mean, in a way, that was kind of my introduction to Star Trek. And so I never really got into it. But as I grew older, I started to realize that there was more of a cerebral element to the Star Trek universe. It's funny because I mean, most people don't realize how much of a commentary, especially the original series was on the time that it was created. I mean, it was made in the 60s, and there was, the whole race issues going on, and all kinds of different things were happening, in the world, and America in particular. And I really find it interesting that Star Trek was able to kind of comment on these things. I mean, you look at all the different alien races in Star Trek, and each one of them kind of represents a struggle America was having at the time, and the world too, And that's something that, as I've grown older, I've really come to appreciate. But just on a visceral level, I've always found, until the J.J. Abrams reboot, of course, I've always found the Star Wars movies to be more enjoyable. Just because they're fun popcorn movies, they're action movies, they're adventure movies. So I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of, I've tried to catch up on some of the stuff, which, you'll find out which ones I have and haven't seen here. So let's just jump into it. With that being said, so out of all the original series movies, which one did you actually see first?
I actually saw them in order. And that's kind of a rare thing, but I actually was able to see them all in order because my sister happened to also be a huge Star Trek fan, and when DVDs first came out, which was the early 2000s, she went to Best Buy. She would go to Best Buy every weekend. I would spend the night with her every weekend, and she would go to Best Buy every weekend, and she would buy a handful of DVDs, and back at my house, we were still at VCR, so she'd go out to the Best Buy, and she'd buy 3 or 4 DVDs. And remember, at the time, DVDs were like $30 a pop,
Mm-hmm.
So she'd buy a couple DVDs, and we'd take them back to the house, and we'd watch them, and one night we went out to Best Buy, and she was able to find them all, and she ended up buying all of them, all the originals, and, we went home, and that was our weekend, which was great. I was not going to complain, but put them all in order, so, that was something really special to be able to see them like that.
Yeah. Okay. So what are your thoughts of the original Star Trek: The Motion Picture then?
Okay, Star Trek: The Motion Picture, I believe, came out in '79, I think. And
hold on.
if
I'll
find out. Yeah, I think it was directed by Robert Wise. This one. I'll let you find that first, but
yes, it was directed by Robert Wise, and it came out in '79.
I thought so. This one was just basically, to me, it was a good movie to start with because they really didn't overdo anything, and Star Trek had been away for a long time. Well, not really a long time, but it had been away for a few years now. Yeah, well, yeah, that's 10 years, yeah. So that's kind of a long time. So, it had been 10 years and, the people were wanting it. So they just kind of, basically all they did was they just took what they would do for a normal episode and just stretched it a little bit further and just made it into a movie. And it wasn't too bad. I think it had something to do with, like, a cloud that was destroying stuff. And yeah, they had to save the planet, of course. And, it wasn't too bad. I mean, it was, it was a pretty decent film. I don't really remember too much about it, but I remember thinking that, for the film, it wasn't really that bad of a film. So, I don't know if you've seen that one. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I actually never even saw this movie. Well, I got about halfway through it, and I honestly just found it boring. I mean, to be quite honest with you, there's not a lot that happens in this movie, and I understand that, I mean, I understand that they kind of have to lay the groundwork, especially for people that weren't familiar with the show, or maybe that were kind of young kids when the show was airing on TV. But I mean, I just remember like there being like a 3-minute shot of the Enterprise like docking, or like the first time you see it.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it just felt a little too self-indulgent for my taste, but I mean,
it was a runtime problem. I'll go to that one. It did have a runtime, even though the movie wasn't really all that long. It still felt really long, because it would have these long, stretched out scenes, and like you said, there would be like the Enterprise docking, and I remember one scene where the camera was just on everybody in the main command center. And nobody was doing anything. They were just sitting there, and Kirk was just, it's like, somebody gonna say something? What's going on? But
yeah. Okay, well, I think that's enough on the original film. So, moving on to what is probably regarded as the greatest Star Trek film, which is Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. So, why don't you talk about this one for a minute here?
Okay. If you want to make a Star Trek movie, and you have one that's okay, and, like you said, it was just kind of laying the groundwork, what do you do next? Well, you take one of the best bad guys from the franchise, one of the most popular bad guys, and you put him in the movie, and you bring him back with a vengeance, and this is what Star Trek II basically was. This was essentially, even though it didn't have the same ending, and, I'm not gonna, it's, in a sense, it was The Empire Strikes Back, before The Empire Strikes Back.
It is. It still is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and you have Kahn. Kahn comes in, and he just takes down everything, and he's tearing down the system, and, he strands Captain Kirk and Spock on a planet, and he takes over the Enterprise, and, he's killing off Federation members, and he's tearing the system down, and, he's just so vile and corrupt and evil, and, and then you have, of course, the most famous scene in the the two most famous scenes in the whole movie is one where, of course, is where he gets Captain Kirk gets stranded on the planet, and he's like, God! And you can hear it all the way out in space, and that was really awesome.
I think this proves the theory that people can hear you scream in space.
Well, only in the Star Trek universe,
exactly.
Not in Alien.
Yeah.
But, so you have this, and then you have the next scene, which is the death of Spock, and that's kind of a tough one to swallow, because, you always have Spock, he's your favorite, besides Captain Kirk, he's your favorite guy, everybody loves Spock, everybody quotes Spock, and then you kill him. It's like, well, holy crap, you've been off for 10 years, then you make a movie, and then you bring this, and then you kill Spock.
Yeah.
So, what are we supposed to do now? Which leads into the third movie. So, and I know you've seen The Wrath of Khan. So, what are your thoughts on?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely fantastic. I mean, even for a Star Trek movie, there's really anyone could ask for, everything anyone could ask for. I mean, it's got adventure, it's got betrayal, it's got all these things going on. I mean, I really love the fact that it's kind of the Kahn character's kind of seeking revenge. I mean, it really gives the villain something interesting to be, an interesting reason for him to be doing all these things. But I mean, I think it also doesn't help that they got Ricardo Montalban. I mean, this guy is just awesome. He's just awesome. And the funny thing is I was actually watching Wrath of Khan on Netflix about a week ago, kind of just in preparation for Into Darkness, because, according to rumors that Khan might actually be the villain in Into Darkness, which we don't know yet for sure. But
right. Yeah,
I mean, you don't realize as much as Kahn is a a mental, a kind of a psychological threat to these guys. He's even more so a physical presence. Like, you watch that movie now and you realize how freaking ripped that dude is. Like, he is buff in that movie. Yeah, and I think that only adds to the scariness of him, But I mean, honestly, like
and plus he's got the big slash across his chest. He's kind of just laying back and he's quoting all this stuff and talking, and you're like,
he seems
this guy
so
is
in control,
dangerous.
Yeah, he seems so confident and in control of what he's doing in this movie that it just makes him that much scarier. And I don't know. I mean, maybe if they would have had somebody else play him, it might have been just as effective. But I think the decision wasn't Ricardo Montalban in Space Seed, if I'm not mistaken, correct? Did he reprise his role?
Yeah, Ricardo Montalban was in Space Seed.
Okay, and I think that was a smart because
reprising his role.
Because I don't know if I mean, maybe it was the way that the character is written, but I think Montalban's acting choices in this movie really kind of helps it out, because without such a strong villain, this movie probably wouldn't have been as memorable. I mean, it would have been like Star Trek 6 or whatever. It's just there.
Yeah.
But I mean, I mean, we're not saying anything that hasn't been said before. I mean, it's pretty obvious, even to people that aren't into Star Trek or that know a little bit about the Star Trek, that Wrath of Khan is kind of the pinnacle of the Star Trek universe. So I mean, I don't know. Do you have anything else to say?
There would have. Well, I was gonna say, for the Star Wars fans out there who think that Star Wars is better than Star Trek as a movie franchise. Well, I mean, I can kind of go along with you a little bit. There was one thing, talking about how it is. Well, there's another really terrifying part of this movie that just still really creeps me out, and that's the ear things that they put in the dude's ears. And they lose control.
The bugs, It's that effect is still even watching. Yeah. Even watching that the other day, it was just like those worms they just seem so realistic, even though they're probably like an animatronic or something like that. There's just such a reality to this film that really kind of adds to the success of it.
Right. And then when you hear Kahn talk about these things, he says, when we first got here, they killed off a majority of our tribe. And it's like, dude, like, you're insanely tough. And this worm is wiping out your thing, and then he sticks it in the dude's ear, and he goes crazy and, starts strangling crew members, and it's like, man, this movie was the Wrath of Khan was kind of no holds barred, but I think it's time we go ahead and move on to the third film.
Which I haven't seen, by the way. I haven't seen number 3. I've seen tidbits of 4, and I haven't seen the other 2 original series. So why don't you talk about Star Trek 3: The Search for Spock? Does it live up to the promise of Wrath of Khan?
It's a decent, predecessor. It kind of, it was okay. It was more or less it's just like it said. It was just, it was just the search for Spock. And I don't really remember too much about it. I remember that I thought that there actually was a lot more work in the costumes and the makeup in this one, because there's a lot of Klingons in this. So, there has to be a lot more makeup and everything. But, it was a pretty decent film.
Well, I mean, the thing that strikes me the most about Star Trek 3, that interests me the most, is really just to kind of get the conclusion of the first 3 films, and to kind of get the resolution from Wrath of Khan. I mean, that's really, for me, the only real reason to watch the movie is to kind of see that story being finished being told. But at the same time, I mean, the title itself is inherently flawed in that it ruins Wrath of Khan in some respects. I mean, I had Wrath of Khan ruined for me just by researching the Star Trek universe. I mean, one could easily put it together, just based on the title of Star Trek 3 alone. So, I mean, I don't know. I'll probably end up visiting it one day, but it's not too high on my list. It's not such a high priority.
Here's one thing about it that was kind of kind of took everybody by surprise was that Leonard Nimoy actually directed this film.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and, it's I think it was one of the first things that he really directed. So, in a sense, he was entangled in the Star Trek universe, and so, it got good reviews. It really didn't get the best of reviews, but it got enough to go on. But, I think Nimoy actually did a really good job of directing the movie, but it kind of moved slow, and, it was more or less another one of those stretching the Star Trek thing out a little bit too long. The run time was really bad. This was one of the movies that was long, and plus the run time was really long as well. So it kind of went from there. And the Voyage Home, if you want me to just go ahead, I'll just go ahead and talk about the Voyage Home.
All I gotta say is save the whales, save the whales, man. One of those kind of messages that, again, Star Trek integrates in an interesting way, even though it's a huge plot element in this one, and it's kind of shoehorned, I mean, Star Trek kind of normally does a good job of not making these things completely blatant in the content that they're doing, but go ahead and talk about this one.
Okay, I'm going to keep this one short and simple. Nimoy is back directing here, and that was one distinct thing I remember was that he directed this one, and, this one was so boring. Like, it was so boring. There was limited action. There was really nothing going on in this movie. But the crazy thing about this one is that this one got it earned nominations, Academy Award nominations for its cinematography and its audio.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really crazy. So it got nominated for a lot of stuff. I don't really know if it won a lot, but this one I just could not stand. I barely made it through, and I found myself getting up, several times, moving around. But the crazy thing is that this one's like the most well-received of the Star Trek films. And that's crazy because you've got The Wrath of Kahn, which is so great. And then you've got this one, which is just kind of it's just like it's just a good old movie, it's like a family movie.
Yeah.
And
I don't know, like I just find the prospect of a Star Trek movie that takes place in modern day America not very interesting. I mean, the whole reason for watching Star Trek is to kind of boldly go, pun intended there.
Yeah.
But and I don't know about you, but I mean, that just really bugged me about this one. I sat down and watched it, and it's, again, I've used this analogy before, but it's like setting the original Star Wars completely on Tatooine and never leaving the planet, because you have this huge world to explore, and you're confining it to this tiny space. So I don't know. That's kind of the vibe I get from Voyage Home.
Yeah, let's go ahead and move on to number 5, which is The Final Frontier. Okay, I'm guessing you've seen this one, right?
No, I haven't seen either this or 6.
Okay. Well, here we go. What would you like to do after Leonard Nimoy gets done directing? Well, naturally, you want to go ahead and let Captain
William Shatner
get behind the camera and start directing. So he directs The Final Frontier. This one is just over the top. It's extremely silly. I think Spock's half-brother believes he's been summoned by God. At the end of the movie,
so what you're saying is it's kind
God.
of like Shatner's portrayal of Kirk in a way.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it is kind of over the top. I mean, the speech patterns he uses and things like that. I mean, it really, from what you're describing, it sounds to be that. But continue.
Yeah, they go, the Enterprise goes through the Milky Way and beyond, and they find God. They talk to God. It was, it's kind of crazy. And, who better enemy than to have back than the Klingons? We can't stop killing Klingons. But you know, of course, it's just one of those things. You know, it's a film that's watchable. You know, it's good for a watch maybe. If you're a real diehard Star Trek fan, then I could see. You know, I could see why you'd like it, but, you know, to me, not the best. It was a lot better than 5, but, you know, or it's a lot better than 4, sorry, but
Yeah.
That's just because 4 was so utterly boring. And with that being said, you know, it's time to go on to number 6.
Oh, yeah, you just kind of threw up in your mouth a little bit there talking about that one.
What,
well,
number 5 or number 6?
Both. But number 6 in particular, I think, just going off what you said real quick, I just think it's funny that the Klingons have kind of become the Lex Luthor of the Star Trek world. That's the villain that they keep returning to. That is interesting for a movie, but not any movies after that, you know. But again, I haven't seen the movies, so this is complete conjecture. So make of it what you will.
Okay, well, here's the thing. Star Trek 6 it no longer had Nimoy or Shatner as the director. It went with Nicholas Meyer, and he decided to kind of go back to the action sequences a bit. And this was kind of like a schlocky type of Star Trek movie. There's a lot of action. There was a lot of violence. You know, it was almost mindless in some sense. You know, There was limited plot in this one, but this one's better than 4 and 5. You know, and it's just because, and I think the reason that is because it's kind of a breath of fresh air from, you know, the Save the Whales campaign and William Shatner's silly idea about God, and, you know, the studios decided that, you know, these guys should no longer be in control of the films and that they were going to do it and get a different director. And I kind of didn't, you know, have a problem with this one so much. I mean, it wasn't that bad, you know. It had a lot of critical and commercial failure. The budget was a lot smaller for this one, but you know, I still thought it wasn't too bad of a film. It's not the best one, but you know, it's pretty good. And you know, once again, back to killing Klingons. You know, the Klingons are back. So. You know, what more are we going to do except for why don't we just go ahead and just wipe out the Klingons? But, you know, Christopher Plummer was in this movie, so, you know, that was kind of different. And, you know, and it was okay. But there's really not a lot to go on here except for the fact that Christopher Plummer quotes a lot of Shakespeare before Shatner blows him all halfway to hell. So...
That's funny.
The last thing in the movie, the last line that Christopher Plummer says is "to be or not to be," and then he gets blown up by, you know. But let's move on now. We're let's get off this one.
All right. So the next movie that came out is Star Trek Generations. Now this is an interesting one because it does have William Shatner in it. I believe. It doesn't have Spock, if I remember correctly, because of some kind of contract issue they were having. They decided not to bring him back. I mean, and this movie came out in 1994, so, I mean, he'd been doing Spock for 30-plus years almost now, so I can understand why he wouldn't want to come back. But this one's interesting because it kind of bridges the gap, if you will, between the original series crew and the Next Generation crew. So why don't you talk about this one, and then I'll give my thoughts.
Okay, well, this is something that I actually was looking forward to seeing when I was a little kid, because at this point I was following the show on a regular basis, The Next Generation, and then, you know, my mom, you know, stuck me in the car and was like, I'm going to go take you to see Star Trek, and I was like, yes, you know, Kirk and Picard. And we get there, and the movie starts off, and it's a pretty good movie. You know, there's a lot to keep my attention because, of course, you've got Patrick Stewart and you've got Captain Kirk, and they're talking to each other, and you're like, wow, what a nerdy dream come true. You know, and then the action starts, and it's pretty decent, and you know, and then they do the ultimate thing. they kill Captain Kirk. And not only do they kill Captain Kirk, but they kill Captain Kirk in the worst freaking way. And I was so mad about it. He falls off a bridge. Like, that's how you're going to kill Captain Kirk? You're going to make him fall off a bridge? You know, I mean, what are you going to do next? Are you going to have, you know, Captain Picard die and, you know, face down in a bowl of soup? Like, you know, the worst, you know, that ruined the film for me is, you know, if you were going to kill Captain Kirk, make it be glorious, you know, don't fucking fall off a bridge or blow a bridge out from under him. But the movie wasn't too bad. For the first time in a long time, I didn't have a runtime issue with the movie. So I felt like things were going along pretty smoothly in this movie. The direction was pretty good, and, you know, everybody, you know, really enjoyed it. I thought it did very good. It did very good at the box office, too.
Yeah.
So I thought this one was pretty good. I'm trying to remember here.
Remind me real quick. Is this the one where Data gets that new chip in his head or whatever, and he gets to like feel emotion or whatever it is, or am I mistaking this for like First Contact or Insurrection? Because I can't quite remember. The first time I actually watched this movie was maybe about a year ago. I had only seen First Contact, Insurrection, Nemesis. You know. Two bad ones, in my opinion, and one good one, but...
Yeah, I don't think this one is that one. I think that's in the next one. But if I remember correctly, I think the Romulans are the bad guys in this, and that's an interesting pick for the bad guy because. You know, also a breath of fresh air because we were finally done killing Klingons, you know. And
4 movies later.
Yeah, and, you know, the Klingons actually help out in this one, and, you know, this one wasn't too bad. You know, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing that really struck me about it, too, is I had absolutely no idea Malcolm McDowell was in this movie as the villain, and I thought he was pretty delightful as the villain in this. He's kind of hamming it up, you know, but he's doing it in a conscious way, you know. I mean, he realizes what kind of movie he's in. But I mean, that and the other thing that really struck me about this movie was, I mean, I'm not a Next Generation guy, and I figure she's in the show, but I was like, why the freaking hell is Whoopi Goldberg in this movie for like 2 minutes and then absolutely has nothing to do with the plot? So it's just like one of those things. It's like,
yeah, she never really, even in the show, she really never has that much to do with it. She kind of just there, and she kind of just says her thing, and then she's gone. But you know, you kind of get the symbolism at the end of the movie because Picard goes and he buries Kirk, you know, before being shuttled to the wreckage of the Enterprise, and you know that's kind of, you know, to me. That was okay to do, was have Picard bury Kirk. It was kind of an honor thing. It was like a passing of the torch. You know?
Exactly.
I wish they would have found a more noble way to kill Captain fucking Kirk, but you know
falling off a bridge, man. It's like that was funny. I mean, God, yeah. I mean,
like you took a guy. You took a guy who's been an icon for 30-some plus years. Like, we're just gonna have you. You know, fall off a bridge. It's like,
oh man, yeah. I mean, the thing that I take away from this movie the most is, like you said, it was kind of a transitional movie. You know, almost like they weren't. I mean, the plot's pretty thin in this one, and it seems like they were more focused on kind of, like you said, passing the torch. So let's move on. Star Trek: First Contact came out next. Now, as far as I'm aware, this is considered to be the best Star Trek Next Generation movie. And, you know, I mentioned that I actually just watched Generations for the first time. My dad got the box set. Like, we got it at a garage sale or something for real cheap.
That's really cool.
And funny enough, every movie was in there except for First Contact. So I haven't seen this movie in about 5 years, and I felt like I missed out a little bit. So why don't you tell me about this movie, and then I'll kind of give my vague thoughts on it because it's been so long.
Okay. As as you had Star Trek the Motion Picture, and as you had Star Trek Generations, which were kind of just laying the groundwork for the next movie, and then you had Wrath of Khan, now you get First Contact, and this pushes Next Generation over the top for me. You have the Borg, who is the worst, to me, next to Kahn, is the worst bad guy in the Star Trek universe. You know, essentially, they're just Brainiac from Superman. You know, they're just come to assimilate everything, and, you know, and to them, it's not bad. Like, that's the scary part, and there's no reasoning with them. They're just here to take you and assimilate you, and then you're just part of the core. And, you know,
and I mean, that's something too. Like, I mean, you look at the Dark Knight and the Joker. You know, I mean, he has no motivation, and that always makes a villain scarier. But go ahead and continue. I just think that's an interesting thing to point out. You know.
Yeah, and, you know, you've got that terrifying ship, that cube, like, that's, how does that fly, you know, and you're sitting here and you're watching this when I'm a little kid, and I'm like, how does that fly through space, you know, you know, and it's just, you get the speech from Picard, and, you know, that really good, hard, you know, and it's just really full of action, and it's really over the top, and you've got the Borg and Data fighting each other, and, you know, then you've got Worf, who's about
and the Borg Queen too, mind you, which, if I'm not mistaken, was one of the first, like, characters that actually had digital enhancements, you know, in the age of visual effects and things like that, which is pretty neat. It probably doesn't hold up, but it's still kind of neat.
Yeah, I mean, it's still a pretty good movie, you know, it's a Star Trek film, so you gotta take it for what it is for that time period, you know, and, you know, and then you've got the final little thing where Worf is at his last, you know, he's at his last tidbit, and, you know, where's Picard, and I've set the ship to ramming speed, we've gotta plow into the cube to save Earth, and then right when he's about to do it, here comes Picard, and he comes in and he saves the day, and, you know, he blows, you know, the cube, and they leave, and, you know, it's just, this one was almost Wrath of Khan-esque, you know.
Yeah. But I mean, at the same time, it's got the traits of Wrath of Khan, but it seems like it's a little more action oriented as well, you know, which is not like most of the other Star Trek movies, I guess. From Part 6, which you said definitely has some action moments, but you know, and that's the thing I remember as a kid. I just remember having a lot of action, which surprised me, you know. So, I mean, I don't know. Do you have anything else to say on this? Sorry, I interrupted.
Well, no, you're fine. I actually thought that with the director here, which is Jonathan Frakes, they chose him to direct it because he was someone, you know, who they felt like he understood Star Trek, you know, and this was his first theatrical, you know, film, and I really thought that, you know, they really did a good job on picking the director here, and I didn't feel the runtime with this. You know, this was a movie that, you know, was really good. I really enjoyed it. You know, it's one that I go back to when I just want a Star Trek film. You know, it's really one that I go back to, and I probably will for a long time until I can't anymore. But so with that being said, I think it's time
I know
to
what's
move
coming
on.
next. Sorry, it's a little hint there at what's to come with the next two movies. So, Star Trek Insurrection. This movie is bad. I mean, it is bad. Let me just read the synopsis, and I think this will give you an idea of the movie. The crew of the Enterprise launch a rebellion on the Baku homeworld against Picard's superior officer and his ally, who want to relocate the Baku to gain possession of a medical cosmic radiation that floods their planet. Oh, that's just a mouthful in itself. But so, what are your thoughts on Insurrection?
God, extremely boring.
Yes.
Extremely crappy. Deep Space Nine was now out on television, so Star Trek was kind of losing its kick a little bit. And the reason they did this was just to kind of, I think they were trying to do this where they wanted to bring back the next generation, because Deep Space Nine really didn't have a deep following. And what better way to do it than just to make this crappy film? You know, it's so boring. It's so, you know, the best part of the movie is watching Data, cock a shotgun, and I'm like, what is he doing with a shotgun? And I was like,
That's pretty funny.
Why is LaForge, Riker, Worf, Picard, and Data holding shotguns? What are we doing? And then they're riding on horses? Like, what's going on in this film? And
it's like we jumped into the 19th century from a Star Wars or a Star Trek film.
And the thing about it is like, I hardly ever saw any trailers for this movie. I saw one, and it really didn't give me a lot to go on. And so I didn't get to go to the theaters and see this. Thank God. But, when the movie came out, I saw the poster, or I saw the movie case in the store, the video rental store, and I thought, man, that really looks cool, because the ship's flying, and you got the symbol in the face, and I was like, oh, that looks pretty cool, and I hadn't seen it yet, so I was like, oh, I'm going to take this home, and I'm going to watch it. And boy, was I just in for a treat.
Yeah, I remember seeing this film in particular when I was younger. I believe it was on home video. And I remember liking Insurrection, and I remember liking First Contact, and I watched this one thinking to myself, like, what the hell is going on here? Like, I mean, it was so bad that I didn't even remember it when I came back to revisit it, 13 or 14 years later or whatever, and it's just totally unmemorable, it's just totally, I mean, even now, I have a hard time recalling what happens in the movie. And I think that says a lot.
Yeah. The crazy thing is like, God, why? Like, I don't even really want to talk about this, but, the crazy thing is like, with Patrick Stewart being in the film, you think the film is, automatically anything with Patrick Stewart's going to be pretty good. You're like, oh man, it's going to be pretty decent. And, Insurrection was sad because the best freaking character in the movie was F. Murray Abraham. Picard Stewart puts on his worst performance in this Star Trek film, and F. Murray Abraham is the best guy here. And that's, and nothing against F. Murray Abraham. He's a pretty good actor, but come on. Like, please.
I mean, we're talking about Patrick Stewart here, and when you say the guy, I mean, he doesn't really give many bad performances, even in films like X-Men, and the bigger stuff he's been in, he's still really great in, as much as I know you hate those movies, I mean, you still have to understand that he's pretty decent in those,
it's the only way I even watch X-Men is because of Patrick Stewart, because he's the only one who makes them tolerable,
Yeah. Okay, so why don't we move on to Nemesis? What are your thoughts on this film? What are your thoughts on the film that killed the Star Trek franchise for over 10 years? Oh, not 10 years, I guess 6 or 7.
Well, I'm not going to really say that this one killed anything. I just think that, Star Trek hadn't had a movie in a good bit, so, I mean, it hadn't been that long, but I'm trying to get a timeline of how, I think, wasn't Insurrection was 98?
And then Nemesis was 2002.
It was 2002?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, okay. Well, this one's kind of interesting because, we had just gone into the new millennium. And, we have the very bad Star Trek film that we're coming off of. And so Paramount decides that they're going to release Nemesis. And, I found the overall plot of the movie, like, not too bad. It was.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting character study, especially for Picard. With the clone.
Yeah.
And I think there's some interesting ideas going on there, but I have to agree. It's a great idea, but it's just not executed that well.
Yeah, it's not done well. Stuart I can't even say his name. Stuart Barrett.
Yeah.
He does the film. And, for those of you who don't know who he is, he did Executive Decision and U.S. Marshals, and
Hey.
he had a couple collaborations with Richard Donner, and it was a kind of a strange choice for me on why go with this guy for the director, but I think they wanted to get somebody in there with some with some fresh ideas, and plus Star Trek Enterprise had just failed basically, and which didn't take too long. But it wasn't too bad of a movie. It barely made its money back, and I think the problem was that people were kind of drained on these Star Trek movies now because Star Trek really hadn't had you hadn't had a really good Star Trek, show out in a very long time. Deep Space Nine was gone. Enterprise was gone. The one with the woman was, it was a complete
Voyager.
Total failure.
At the time that Nemesis came out, there was really this oversaturation of Star Trek in the pop culture zeitgeist, I mean, you have, 3 or 4 shows that have been on in the last 10 years? You've had a movie every 2 years for all of the 90s. I mean, there's really a lot of oversaturation, and I could see it becoming very boring at a certain point. I mean, there's as much as Star Trek is trying to comment on society and things like that, I think there's only so much you can say. And when you get to that point, I think it's kind of just repeating. It's repetitive,
And this was another thing. To me, I felt like they were trying to do this thing to where, like they were trying to do with the original Star Trek. They had such a big following and such a high demand that, we can't really bring it back to television because we signed off on it. So let's push it into the movies. And that's what they did, and then here we go. So TGN's over, which I think TGN, it lasted a very long time, but I think they could have kept going.
Yeah.
TGN had not become boring. It had not become oversaturated, and it didn't become overwhelming. It was a show that could continuously be tuned into, and the ratings showed. The ratings never really dropped. There was a few low points for it, but not so much that it got killed off. But, so then it was like, well, it's done now, so let's just start pushing the movies out now. And, oh man. It's just one of those. It was one of those movies to where the movie itself was kind of predictable almost to me.
Yeah.
And the casting of Tom Hardy as as the clone for Picard was actually really interesting for me. I actually thought that was really cool. And, because he's virtually unknown. Excuse me. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you look at the success he's had in movies now, and physically how much different he is. It's kind of shocking to see like a skinny Tom Hardy in the Star Trek movie. But I mean, I have to agree. Tom Hardy's definitely one of the highlights of that movie. I think he's able to stand toe to toe with Patrick Stewart pretty well. I mean, for not having. I mean, you got to understand, Stewart's a Shakespearean, a classically trained Shakespearean actor, and so for someone who's not trained in that mold to kind of go head to head with him, I think it says a lot, about the potential of Hardy, which he's obviously shown in the past few years. But
I think this is really something that really, he really captured my imagination here, because it's like, well, what if Picard was evil? What if he was evil? And this is what you get. And, it's like you're saying, he really does a good job of matching wits with, with not just the Picard character, but Patrick Stewart as an actor. And Patrick Stewart, for those of you who really don't know, Patrick Stewart really doesn't do a lot of films. He doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
He makes cameos, and he does some television.
He does a lot of theater, though, too,
Yeah, he's mostly
theater.
A theater actor. Yeah, and, that's what Patrick Stewart mostly does in his off time, is just theater. Because that's just what Patrick Stewart likes to do. And I will absolutely recommend this, whether you're a Shakespeare fan or not. If you go on Netflix and you find Hamlet, it's perfect with Patrick Stewart. It's very well done, and it's just something that I will rewatch over and over, because Patrick Stewart doing Shakespeare is just incredible.
It's gold. It's gold.
Yeah. This basically is. And if you don't like Shakespeare, but you like Patrick Stewart, after you watch him, you may have a different take on it. But anyways, regardless. But, this one kind of dragged a little bit for me, but, it barely made its money back. I think it only made like $7 million of the $60 million that it cost to make the movie.
Yeah.
So
it was a failure.
Yeah.
And I think again that's not. I mean, there's definitely faults with the film, but I think again it just goes back to people kind of being sick of Star Trek in a way. I don't know if that's the right word, but again, just oversaturation of the market. So let's go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, if you really want to put Star Trek into motion, you kind of have to have this thing to where you take some time with it. It has to be like a build up to the next film. We need to see some age on the characters, not it's been 2 years and Data's. He's got a different color eye now, or whatever. It's you got to see a little bit of age for your characters. But anyways, let's move on.
Okay, so it was a long, long wait for fans of Star Trek, but they actually got their Star Trek reboot in 2009. I'm gonna go ahead and step in and talk about this movie for a little bit because it's truly the Star Trek film that turned me on to how fun a Star Trek story really could be. And not being too familiar with the characters, of the original series. I mean, of course, the Scotty catchphrases and the Bones catchphrases, and I mean, anybody that knows anything about pop culture is going to be somewhat familiar with Kirk and Spock. But I think what this movie does so well is that it not only it pays homage to those people that love the original series, but it also kind of brings younger viewers in, and it makes it interesting for both people. But at the same time, they never disrespect the original cast. And I mean, it must have been just such a daunting challenge for Roberta Orci and Alex Kurtzman to kind of take these beloved characters that really haven't been seen since the 80s, so 25 years? Yeah, I mean, and to make them fun and interesting again, I mean, because, again, it goes back, there's only so many things you can do with these characters, but I think the reason why that was successful is because J.J. Abrams got the casting right. I mean, and as much as people might give the movie flack for kind of having a different kind of Captain Kirk, if you will, I think it was an inspired choice to kind of go away from that. I mean, if you haven't seen the special features on the Blu-ray for Star Trek 2009, it's a must-watch. I mean, it's a great set of special features. It's totally in-depth. But one of the things that Chris Pine goes into is he said he felt it would have almost been more disrespectful to try to emulate or to copy or to do the same things that William Shatner had done, but and that's what's so great about his performance as Kirk is he keeps the essence of what Kirk is while putting a new spin on it, and that's kind of how I feel about the whole movie. So what are your thoughts on Star Trek 2009?
Okay, well, for one, I'll go ahead and say that I thought the casting choices were just all perfect. He got them. He really sat down and he really looked at the original cast, and in order to kind of keep the same thing, he went with the characters with the actors who kind of looked and had the same feel, and he really did that. And with Chris Pine being Captain Kirk, he kept the, if I'm looking at Captain Kirk in Starfleet, this is the Captain Kirk I see. He's just this arrogant, brash, womanizing, cocky, drinking, SOB who's just, my favorite scene in the whole movie is when they're doing the test, the exam, and he's like sitting there eating this apple, and he's just like, just fire all the lasers, and
well, and I think that goes back to also like kind of I mean, because nobody if I'm not mistaken, I don't think you actually ever see how the original crew gets together, correct? And how they kind of form. Again, I mean, I think they just do such a good job with it. I mean, I know the Kobayashi Maru is mentioned, and you kind of see it in Wrath of Khan, but you never, they mention like, oh, it's not like how you did it, Kirk, and kind of seeing that play out. it was really interesting. But in particular, in that scene, there's that shot where it goes from Kirk, and it kind of pans off, and you see that Spock is watching the test, and you realize how important this moment is for these characters, because without it, they would have never gone down the path that they've gone down.
Exactly.
And I think it's just the little moments like that, the character moments that are in it. So well in this movie. And, it's just such a fun movie, too. It's very enjoyable to watch.
The only real problem that I even had with the film was that I felt like it was kind of cheap. Because, they dump him off at the ice planet, and he meets Spock Prime, who's Leonard Nimoy, and then Leonard Nimoy's telling him about how things are in his universe, and I felt like in a way that, even though J.J. Abrams was making it his own Star Trek film, and I can kind of see where he's kind of paying his respect to the original, at the same time, it's like he just couldn't get away from it a little bit. You see where I'm saying there with him bringing the Spock in and our universe, and he's talking about how he encountered everything, and
again, that's always the exposition-y time travel stuff is always gonna have problems and holes in it. I mean, time travel inherently is gonna have problems just because it's something that is imaginary and is really just kind of a figment of our creation, humanity's creation. So I mean, there's always going to be problems, and I think they handle it pretty well. I mean, at the same time, you have to remember that they're trying to create a whole new universe too, and I mean, it's a very thin line you have to walk with that, and as much as someone could have problems with it, I just find those scenes to be enjoyable. I mean, you look at the banter that they have together. Even, I mean, Nimoy and Chris Pine, they've never acted together, and it still kind of feels like they know each other in a way, Yeah. And I think that shines through for me more than anything. And especially when they go to find, when they find Scotty, and I really love those scenes. As many plot holes and stuff as there are in them, but overall, again, it's just a fun movie, and kind of like the Generations or the original motion picture, it's kind of setting up for this, this next sequel that's coming out this week. And again, I mean, I don't know how many times they can do it, but this really does feel like The Empire Strikes Back or The Wrath of Khan, Star Trek Into Darkness.
Yes, it does.
So, that'll be a nice segue. What are your thoughts on Star Trek Into Darkness? I know we've kind of talked about it before on the movie, summer movie preview, but why don't you, are you excited? Are you skeptical? Does having the prospect of a Kahn-like villain in the movie kind of scare you? Because it kind of does scare me, in a way.
Well, here's what I think. And this is kind of going to go back. One thing I did want to compliment, though, on the J.J. Abrams' first Star Trek movie was I love Eric Bana as the bad guy.
Oh, my gosh, thank you, yes.
I really do.
Yes, we actually, let's talk about that for a second, because in all of the reviews and people talking about the movie, they always cite, well, I guess maybe they're citing the character as being poorly written, but I actually think he's one of the more interesting Star Trek villains, because I don't know, it's kind of, he almost, his motivations are ambiguous in a way. It's almost asking the audience, like, what would you do in this predicament? I mean, your whole home world has been destroyed, and, would you just sit around and watch nothing happen, or would you try to do something about it? And I think it's a pretty interesting villain. And I mean, he doesn't have a lot of screen time at all. So for him to kind of have an impact, on my memory of the movie is really saying something.
Yeah. And, it's kind of one of those things where, like, and I call this the Batman syndrome, because when Batman Begins came out, everyone was like, well, I don't like the villain. Well, Batman Begins isn't about the fucking villain. It's about Batman.
Exactly.
And, they say that the movie is only as good as your villain. Well, that's not always true. And Eric Bana in this movie, he represents everything that, his character does. He's mad. He's angry. He wants revenge. He's been locked up and his home planet's been destroyed. And in a sense, you kind of feel bad for him because,
yes, exactly. He's very, very sympathetic character.
Yeah, and you feel bad for him because all this stuff has just been ripped from him, and you almost at some points in the movie you're like, I kind of hope he gets revenge, I kind of hope he gets something, and, he's really upset about this, and everybody, and this goes back to it, everybody's like, well, the villain's not that good. Stop whining about the villain. The villain doesn't always make the movie. Unless it's a back and forth movie, it doesn't really make it. This movie was about the Starfleet and how they, how they got to where they did, and that's what it should be about. And Eric Bana as the villain was there. Yeah, he was there enough to push them, to show you what needed to happen.
I think that the argument could be made that if the Starfleet stuff wasn't interesting or well done, then the lack of the villain could be, that could be a complaint. But everything else is just so well done that it's just, for me, it's just so wonderful to go back to that. And everything with that is upbeat, and then you have this kind of juxtaposition of this kind of dour gloom, on the what is it, the Narada, I believe, is his ship in that movie. The Narada. And there's this kind of dour, grim kind of feeling that visually that space has, So we got to move on here because we're almost at an hour here, but it's a great movie. It's just a fun movie. So and I hope that's something like we kind of mentioned. I said we talked about this in the summer movie preview, but then the trailers are for the second Star Trek are making it seem very, very dark, It seems kind of like it's not going to have that fun. So I just hope that they have those fun moments kind of interspersed in the throughout the movie.
As much as I can agree with you with the fun and everything like this, I think it's time to really see where we can push this movie franchise. Yeah. And I think J.J. Abrams is looking at this and he says, okay, we had the kind of the paying our respects to the kind of the goofy Star Trek and then the seriousness, all of it combined. But now it's time to get down to business. It's time to get down and dirty. And this is what this film kind of looks like. This kind of is going back to the Wrath of Kahn. It's, the guy's bringing the system down and he's pissed off and,
and he's doing it single-handedly too, from, what I can tell.
He's doing it single-handedly. Yeah. He's doing it single-handedly and he doesn't give a damn who gets in his way, and he doesn't care what the consequences are. He wants to bring down everything. He wants to tear the system down. And a lot of people, who are Star Trek fans, if Benedict Cumberbatch is Kahn, which I can almost safely say he is, if Benedict Cumberbatch is Kahn, I can say that honestly, they did a good choice because for Kahn, to begin with, Kahn wasn't in a spacey. Kahn wasn't this big, overbearing, intelligent brute. Yeah. He was an intelligent guy who was into chess and just conquering things. And, the next step is just conquering stuff. And in order to get to where Kahn had to get to, he had to be isolated and done wrong and all this. And, this kind of goes with this because, Benedict Cumberbatch is, if anybody's ever seen Sherlock, which I've mentioned this once before, if you've seen BBC's version of Sherlock, Benedict Cumberbatch's Sherlock is just extremely intelligent. He's an him himself, he's an intelligent young man. He knows what he's doing.
Listen to you, intelligent young man. Come on. You sound like you're in your 40s, man.
Yeah, he's a young actor. So,
and he has probably one of the coolest names ever. So, he has that going for him,
exactly.
too. So.
Yeah. So, and here's a little history for you. One of the first things that he went to do was he got a casting call for a James Bond video game, and so they were just using his voice, but he didn't know if they were going to capture his motions and his voice, or just his motions, or if they were just going to use his voice. Like I said, I'm kind of reiterating.
Yeah.
But so he says that he walks into this room, and all the people who are there who have been, who have got the casting calls are all there in suit and tie, and their hair's all fixed, and he's like in blue jeans and a t-shirt, and his hair's just kind of everywhere, and he's like, ruh-roh. He's like, I may have just done something terrible here. And so he's sitting there in the waiting room before they call him to do his, test, and he's sitting there, and he's like, okay, I got to go in there, and I got to go all out for this. So when they call him, he goes back in the back, and the first thing they had him do was, they had him, read off Bond, James Bond. So he walks in there, and he puts the headset on, and the music cranks up. Well, when the music cranks up, that little intro with the gun barrel and well, when he hears the music, it clicks in his brain. He's like, I'm going to show off. So, he walks in the sound studio. He starts walking, and they're looking at him, and they're like, why is he walking away from the mic? And, he opens the door, and he walks outside, and when he hears, the certain sound, he turns and does the gun draw, and they're just sitting there staring at him, and
That's
they're
awesome.
like, what are you doing? And he goes back in, and he's, all into the lines and everything. And then when he's done, he leaves. And he was telling the guy, he was like, well, needless to say, they never called me back. So, apparently I didn't get the job. But anyways, seeing him just in that trailer, just that little bit that they give you, you can really see him. He looks so scary. He's just so mind-bogglingly scary, and he's staring. It's like he's staring right through Kirk, and he's just sitting there in that short little line he gives him, and it's like, man, this guy is just. He is incredibly crazy. It's like, he almost reminds me of Raul Silva in Skyfall, of how he's sitting there and having that conversation with Bond when they capture him, and he's just, this guy's just crazy. He's a whack job, and then there's the scenes of him, and they're falling, and all the stuff is, in space is exploded, and it looks like the Wrath of Khan. It might not be. I
think it's either gonna be like you said, kind of setting up the Wrath of Khan, or it's gonna be the Wrath of Khan, but without using the actual name of Khan. It's gonna be Khan with, I think his name is in the plot synopsis John Harrison or something like that.
But I think that's just going to be used as an alias until they really reveal who he is. So I mean, the thing that really has bugged me about the marketing in particular for this movie is the fact that they spent 3.5 years hiding every little secret of this movie, and then in the last month they've released trailers and they've showed footage and they've showed clips, and it's like, I mean, it's I don't know, it's just really frustrating, I mean, I know they have to sell the movie, but it's freaking Star Trek, dude, I mean, people know what they're gonna get. People know what they're gonna get, especially after the first one was such a a rousing success. I mean, the reboot is the highest grossing Star Trek movie to date. I mean, it grossed $257 million just in the United States, a little under 400 worldwide. And I mean, before that, the highest grossing movie was The Voyage Home, which only grossed $109 million in America. So I mean, that's almost quadrupling the grosses. And I mean, I understand that they have to market the movie and stuff. I just wish they wouldn't have given so much away. I mean, there's things that I've seen on the trailers that I wish I didn't really know about. I mean, I've been turning the television off when I see the trailer. It's
I went to see what was it? I believe Iron Man 3 the other last week or whatever, and there was the trailer that showed the Enterprise crashing to Earth, and I'm just like, awesome, thanks for ruining that great moment, a-holes.
Yeah, no.
It's like,
well, I think it's time to go ahead and sign off.
Yeah, I mean, real quick, I want to ask you, where would you like to see the Star Trek movies go after this? So would you like to see J.J. Abrams direct another one? And
well,
if not, go ahead.
To be honest with you, I want to go ahead and see J.J. Abrams do the next movie with this Star Trek cast, and then I would like to see it go into, and this is a big thing for me, if he would be willing to do it, and if they'll even do it. But I would like to see after the third movie, go ahead and let's be done with this Star Trek, and let's move on to the next generation.
I knew you were going to say
really
that.
What I want to see. Yeah,
that would be
I want to see the casting choices. Yeah.
I mean, again, there's only so many things you can do in the Star Trek universe as far as, thematically, and I guess there's enough stories to tell, but at a certain point it becomes a rescue mission, or it becomes, you're running from this person in space, or you're doing this. I mean, there's only a certain amount of things you can do with those sets of characters. So I mean, I have to agree. I'd like to see him take as much of a bold decision as it was to reboot the original series in the first J.J. Abrams movie. I'd like to see him make another bold decision like that in the future, just to keep things interesting and refreshing. And maybe tell some original stories. I mean, which is something that Hollywood can't seem to not do. They always have to have some kind of existing source material. So we'll see. I mean, maybe we could get a Star Trek movie with all new characters.
That could be pretty
there's endless possibilities. So I think that's enough on Star Trek. We're already at an hour and 10 minutes here, so
if you're ready to go ahead and sign off, you kids know the drill. Remember to click to subscribe, click all the links. You guys pretty much, Taylor will give you the email address here in a second, but remember the subscribe button more than likely is going to be up here since, I kind of went crazy and started putting it on everybody's face, and, that wasn't too popular. But, if you want to join, the Movie Nerds Network, we're on Facebook. Just type in that little search bar, Movie Nerds. You'll find us. We're a secret group, but just punch your name in there. We'll add you as soon as possible. And all that, and we try to keep everything fresh and keep everything going, so we got a lot more stuff coming out for you guys. There's a lot more movies we're going to be talking about here soon, and, questions, comments, or concerns, if you don't like the email address, be sure to do it below. And Taylor, I'll go ahead and let you do your plug.
Cool. And also, if you guys want to join the group and for some reason you can't find the group when you search through Facebook, you can just send us your email address to our email, which is movienerdsmailbox@gmail.com, and just tell us that you want to be out of the group, and we can go ahead and shoot you a request, and you guys can join in on the fun. So with that being said, my name is Taylor Salen.
And of course, I'm Tommy Bolden. I can't do the mustache anymore because I got rid of
it. All right, man. I'll see you next time.
You guys have a good night. See you next time, and you guys keep it classy.